close friend of mine is a Dallas veterinarian. I admire the successful small business that Brian has built from the ground up over the last 2 decades. He has, of course, remained open through the pandemic. Medical care is essential for any of God's creatures. At the same time, Brian has enacted some careful restrictions. Only clinic staff may enter the building. Employees take the animals from their owners' cars and return them there after the service is complete. This week, a person whom Brian describes as a good client for over a decade refused to wait in his car. He told my employee that she did not need to be wearing a mask and that COVID fear was a, quote, bunch of expletive deleted. Sadly, this story is not surprising. Many of our neighbors have cast doubt on the seriousness of a pandemic that this week passed 100,000 Americans killed. They've scoffed at precautions necessary to slow the rate of viral transmissions. My friend Eric tells of putting on his mask as he walked into a Dallas Kroger. He saw a man nearby shake his head and mutter something. Then, as they were both getting their carts and Eric was looking for wipes, the man turned to him and sarcastically said, "Ooh, that's right. Need to sanitize everything so that we don't get cooties." Rudeness has been the least of it. Armed protesters stormed Michigan's Capitol in late May, protesting coronavirus restrictions. The president called them very good people and urged the governor to negotiate with them. The purported political theory is that restrictions on individual behavior, even a private business requiring face masks on his own premises, is a restriction of individual liberty. Judaism, with its springtime calendar in particular, offers a very clear message about freedom and duty. Today, our Jewish people completed a cycle of holidays, beginning with our Festival of Freedom on Passover and culminating at Mount Sinai as we received the 10 Commandments on Shavuot. Traditional Jews count 49 days, a week of weeks, a sign of fulfillment from Exodus to Revelation. The message could not be clearer. Liberation from Egyptian bondage does not grant complete freedom. Only when yoked to new duties, Torah's requirements to serve God instead of Pharaoh, are we truly free. Many of us, when we were children, would tell our parents, "You can't make me do that. It's a free country." Some parents responded, "Not my house, it's not." All jokes aside, a free country, like a home where children can grow up to be healthy and independent, requires restrictions of individual liberty. When any of us exercises excessive freedom, we limit the liberty and well-being of other individuals and of our society as a whole. The Torah portion that we begin to read tonight, Parashat Naso, illustrates the point. It begins by describing the responsibilities of the Gershonites, Merarites, and Kohathites, clans of the tribe of Levi. You see, the tent of meeting, the traveling sanctuary, had to be dismantled, carefully wrapped up and carried and reassembled each time the Israelites moved from one place to the next during their 40 years of desert wandering. Gershonites dealt with fabrics and leather, Merarites the hardware, and Kohathites the most precious objects that had to be carried by hand. I imagine that there were days when a Gershonite wanted to hold the priest's jars covered in crimson cloth rather than the more prosaic task of handling tarps. And perhaps came a time when a Kohathite wanted to deal with sockets instead of worrying about those most precious items. However, each had a duty which none was free to shirk, for the welfare of the whole community depended on it. Trust me, the Israelites understood all of these clans to be essential workers. If the tent of meeting were not properly moved and the sanctuary not ready for the sacred service at the next encampment, with each of its parts in perfect condition, God would not be served, and the people would have no confidence in their safety. Face masks are not the first safety feature that some Americans have fought on the basis of individual liberty. Business Insider explains, as traffic deaths rose early in the second half of the 20th century, Congress required all vehicles except buses to be fitted with seatbelts in 1968, but using them was strictly voluntary, and many Americans didn't want to. As late as 1983, fewer than 15% of Americans said that they used seatbelts consistently. New York became the first state to pass a mandatory seatbelt law in 1984. A Gallup poll from July 1984 showed that 65% of Americans opposed mandatory seatbelt laws. Some argued incorrectly that it was safer to be thrown clear of a wreck than to be trapped inside one. In this country, saving freedom is more important than trying to regulate lives through legislation, wrote one staunch opponent in a 1987 Chicago Tribune editorial. The National Highway Transportation Administration reports that seatbelt use in passenger vehicles saved an estimated 14,955 lives in 2017, the most recent year for which records are available. Like research on seatbelts a half-century ago, we know less about the effectiveness of face masks than we will in the months and years to come. Still, Mayo Clinic states it plainly. Face masks, combined with other preventive measures such as frequent hand washing and social distancing, help slow the spread of the virus. A recently released Reform Movement guidelines on values-based decision-making, returning to in-person gatherings during the COVID-19 pandemic, interprets a beloved line from Pirkei Avot, Aseh lecha rav, find yourself a rabbi. Though often translated as teacher, the term rabbi in this phrase in fact suggests expertise. In our Jewish lives, we rely upon the knowledge and guidance of our rabbis, cantors, and educators. As we confront a public health crisis, though, it is the expertise of public health authorities, specialists in infectious disease, and epidemiologists to which we must look for guidance concerning the best decisions. Wearing a mask whenever we are in a public place is a mitzvah, a religious obligation, a duty in spring 2020, and likely for many months to come. Like the Merarites or Gershonites in the wilderness, we are not at liberty to abandon our duty, lest catastrophe befall the entire community. Our Torah portion also includes the words of the priestly benediction, which confirmation parents and I were privileged to bestow upon our confirmands last night. Rashi interprets the second verb in its first line, Yivarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, may God bless and guard you, as a blessing for physical safety and security. Let us pray that God is our partner, blessing us with safety, and let us be God's partners, exercising our duty to wear our face masks, guarding our neighbor's health. Amen.